The thing that happened next was even more confronting than the birth centres rejecting me because of my age. What happened was I drove an hour north to the Gold Coast to a big mainstream commercial hospital, private hospital, to meet with an obstetrician that had been highly recommended. I had 2 obstetricians that were recommended to me. One was an hour south and one was an hour north. So I drove up to an hour north appointment, and I was really excited that I was going to meet a female obstetrician. I thought that was brilliant, and she was horrible. She treated me like a number. She was like a robot. She didn't say, wow, you're pregnant at 48. What happened? Tell me your IVF story. She didn't ask anything about how I got pregnant. She didn't ask anything about my IVF journey. She didn't care. She did all these tests on me and declared I was in perfect state of health and I was having a perfect pregnancy. And then she told me that I would need to be induced at 39 weeks because of my age. And I was like, hang on, wait, what? You just told me I'm in perfect health, I'm having a perfect pregnancy. She said, doesn't matter. You're 48, I'm going to induce you at 39 weeks. I was like, what? That doesn't make any sense. I said, surely you want to wait till later in the pregnancy and see if I end up with any complications like placenta previa or high blood pressure or something. And then I'd understand if you wanted to induce me. But just based on my age, nothing else, you're going to induce me at 39 weeks? She said, yep. And I was like, that doesn't make any sense. That's crazy. I had read a lot about induction, and I was willing to be induced if there was a medical reason for it, but not just because of my age or just because of my hair colour. Yeah, we're going to induce you because you're a blonde. We're going to induce you because you have green eyes. We're going to induce you because you're 48. No, induce me because there's a medical reason. And everything I had seen in that documentary, Birth Time, and everything I had read had told me that often induction can lead to a cascade of medical interventions which can lead to quite a traumatic experience. Sometimes it becomes like a 5-day ordeal for women because it takes ages for the induction to work, and then it leads to forceps and emergency cesareans and all sorts of things. And I personally know a lot of women who've been through that. Because I'm older, I've got a lot of friends who've already had their babies, and I've heard all the stories. So I know that an induction is not something I'm going to do lightly. I'm only going to do it if I need to. I'm not going to do it just because of my age. So I said to her, why on earth are you going to recommend an induction for no reason other than my age? And she said it's because the risk of stillbirth goes up as women get over 35. And I was like, hang on. I know this one. I'm prepared for this. Because, see, I had been listening to a podcast, an amazing podcast, highly recommend it, called Evidence-Based Birth. And they know their stuff. They tell you all the statistics. And the woman on that podcast had explained the difference between relative statistics and absolute statistics. So I knew that the relative statistics were, yes, there's twice the risk of stillbirth if you're over 35 or over 40 or whatever it was. But the absolute statistics were just that it went from being 1 in 1,000 women to 2 in 1,000 women. Yes, it's double the amount, but it's still almost zero. It's a 1 in 1,000 to 2 in 1,000. It's a 0.01% chance to a 0.02% chance. And I said that to her. I said, hang on. Those are relative statistics. The absolute statistic is still completely negligible. She did not want to. She did not like being challenged, this woman. She was not open to a discussion. She was not open to a debate. She was not open to reason. She didn't want a bar of me. And on top of all of that, she just wanted a really conservative birth. I even said to her things like, would there be a chance of having a heated pool in the birthing room? Or things like that. She said, no, I don't believe in water birth. I was like, oh my God, like, this is the most conservative obstetrician. I can't do this. So I gave her the big, ooh, who can stand? Who's a standing girl? Who's a standy, little stander? Let me know in the comments if any of you have ever experienced this kind of narrow-minded, conservative, judgmental approach by a hospital or a doctor because of your age. And let me know how that felt, how you felt about that. I think that would be really interesting for all the women watching this to hear your stories about that. There were a few other obstetricians around here who were very highly recommended, but they were all linked to the birth centres, and I was not allowed to give birth in the birth centre because I was too old. So that just left one obstetrician who is affiliated with the hospital that's an hour south of here. It's a much less, I guess, commercial, expensive, fancy area of Australia. It's a much more country area, and there's also quite a lot of conscious spiritual people down there as well. So I didn't really know what I was going to get myself in for going down there, how conservative the obstetrician was, but I'd heard great things about him from a lot of people, including my own doctor who specialises in postnatal depletion. He had also told me about this obstetrician down south, so I thought, well, he's my last choice. I got a good feeling about him. I've heard great things about him. Let's see what he says. Is he going to require me to be induced at 39 weeks just because of my age? Yeah. Oh my God. I loved this second obstetrician. You couldn't get anyone more different from the first woman if you tried. This man was open-minded. He was funny, like my father. He was kind. He was absolutely happy to hear my feelings and my goals and my dreams and my visions for my birth. When I arrived, what do you think the first thing he asked me was? He said, tell me how you got pregnant. Tell me about your IVF journey. And I was like, you're running an hour late. Do you really want to hear about my IVF journey? He said, yes, I want to hear about your IVF journey. How did this miracle happen? He opened with that. I was like, I love him. This is my doctor. I don't care what else he says. I already love him. I then told him about my story, and then I said, what are your views on induction? Do I need to be induced at 39 weeks just because of my age? He said, don't be stupid. He said, we'll see how your pregnancy is going. If your pregnancy continues to be healthy, we won't induce you. You'll just probably have a natural birth. If complications arise, we'll assess it then. You might need induction. You might need cesarean. We'll see what happens. And I was like, oh my God, he's treating me as a human being, not as a number. I can't. So my story has a happy ending because I found the world's most amazing obstetrician. He's 1 in a million. He has 5 kids of his own. I've recommended him to everybody since. He's beloved in this whole area. He's beloved by the midwives. He's beloved. He's basically a midwife in a male obstetrician's body. That's how he treats women. He wants it to be all what the mother wishes for. He wants the mother to feel empowered. Yes, he works at a hospital, not at home births, but the midwives that are under his jurisdiction, they all really listen to the wishes of the woman, the birthing woman. So he's fantastic. So I realise I'm very, very lucky having access to someone like that. If I was 48 and was living in a big city and all the doctors were much more mainstream and conservative, I probably would have had the same experience from the first doctor over and over. So those of you who are watching who don't have access to an alternative thinking obstetrician like I had, I really feel for you. You may have to face people like the first woman I saw. That may be your only option. All I can tell you is everything I've learned is if you have to go into one of those mainstream situations, conservative situations where they say you're going to have to be induced in this and that, you stick to your guns because it's ultimately your birth. It's your choice legally. You can negotiate with your doctor a birth plan and you may be able to say, well, are you happy to push it back to 40 weeks if we do regular tests in the 39th week? You know, are you happy if we try natural methods of induction before we try medical methods of induction? Like you may be able to negotiate some wriggling room for yourself. And I strongly suggest you at least ask that. And if they won't give you that, you ask around until you find a doctor who's willing to work with you at least a little bit, to negotiate a little bit of wiggle room in those treating you like a number. We're covering our ass for insurance purposes. We're going to treat you, have to do this, have to do this, have to do this, just to keep the hospital safe rather than actually caring about you and what the state of your pregnancy is. So it's definitely worth shopping around, find an obstetrician that you resonate with, that you click with, who's willing to at least give you a bit of negotiating wiggle room in your birth plan. As I said, in the end, I was very lucky I didn't have to do that. But that's how I would have approached it if I hadn't found the second obstetrician. If I'd had to work with that first woman or I'd had to go to 2 or 3 other obstetricians who were all similar, I would have found the one that was slightly less conservative or at least a little bit open-minded and negotiated a few, well, could we try like this? And if the test showed this, then I'm happy to do a cesarean. Or if the test showed this, I'm happy to do an induction. Can we at least do some tests first? Like I would have negotiated for a little bit of wiggle room. So basically I hired that obstetrician. At the time I hired him, I didn't know if I was going to give birth in his hospital or if I was going to have a home birth. All of that was still up in the air, but I knew I wanted him to be the person who checked me every month during my pregnancy, and I wanted him either delivering my baby at the hospital or if I had a home birth, I wanted him on the phone, on call as a backup advisor. And he had 2 different levels of payments depending on if he was going to deliver your baby or if he was just on call as an advisor to a midwife. And he told me I could make that decision later on in my pregnancy. So at the time I just knew I was hiring to check on me during the pregnancy, and I would decide later to what extent he was going to be involved in the actual delivery. So that was fantastic. He did end up delivering her. And he actually delivered her on his birthday. He left his birthday dinner to come and deliver her. What a beautiful man. Honestly, I can't believe that still. And we ended up having a gentle cesarean. As I said, I'll make another video all about that. I had a day of labour first and then a gentle cesarean, and it was beautiful. It was just beautiful. The whole thing was very easy, very stress-free, very gentle, very loving. She came out easily and I recovered perfectly. And most of that was due to the obstetrician that I chose and the approach that he took. Because I lived so far away from a hospital and it was very difficult for me to drive for an hour all the time for checkups, especially as you get more and more pregnant, you need more and more checkups. And I just didn't know if I'd be up to driving when I was 30 weeks pregnant, 32 weeks pregnant. I knew I needed someone closer to home to monitor me in my prenatal state. So I actually found a private midwife who lived near me, and it was worth every cent because she came and visited me whenever I wasn't going to see the obstetrician. On the alternate weeks, she would come and visit me. She came, I think, every second week to my house, and she checked my blood pressure, she checked the baby's heartbeat, she checked everything. We had long talks. We talked about natural birth, we talked about cesarean, we talked about induction, we talked about all the options, we talked about where I was going to give birth. She was really supportive. And when she first came round and she found out my age, because remember, I looked back then about 36 before I gave birth. Now I look older. I looked a lot younger, so she didn't realise how old I was. So I was sort of curious to see what her reaction was going to be. Because you remember, if she ends up being the midwife in the birth, let's say I do a home birth, or there was one other option where I could have rented a birth space closer to the hospital and essentially had a home birth at this birth house, private birth house. She would be the one responsible for delivering the baby. So is she going to be willing to take on a 48-year-old woman giving birth? Is that going to be covered by her insurance? Is she going to feel comfortable with that? So I was really curious to see what she would say. She said to me, oh, well, the oldest woman I've ever worked with was 43, and that went well. She said, I do believe you can have a natural physiological vaginal birth. I'm willing to take you on. Obviously, you're very healthy at the moment. You're having an easy pregnancy. She said, I don't see any reason to consider you high risk. I was like, yes! And actually, the thing that was most important to her was my attitude, was my beliefs, because she could see that I was in such a state of joy. I wasn't really in fear about giving birth at my age, because the thing is, my sister had a really, really easy birth, and my mother had a really, really easy birth. And the only thing that had ever caused me to be worried about giving birth was the chronic pain that I used to have, because I talked about in my previous video how I had 21 years of chronic pain. All my fears around birth were about how will I do it? I'll be in so much pain. My whole body will be hurting. How will I do it? And now I was no longer in chronic pain. I had cured it a year earlier. So I kind of felt a bit invincible because I didn't have the chronic pain. I was like, whatever else. Nothing could be as bad as that chronic pain was. So whatever, bring it on, I'll be fine. Like, if I don't have to deal with chronic pain, I can give birth. So I was actually quite confident, probably a little more confident than I would have been if I hadn't had 21 years of chronic pain that I could go with birth. So she was really happy with my attitude, with the family history of birthing being easy. She didn't see any red flags. She was really happy to take me on as a client. So that was fantastic.
We match today. We match.
And the only other people that I really had to deal with were people like nurses, midwives at the hospital. None of them batted an eyelid that I was 48, because generally people I dealt with through these 9 months, most people were pretty fine with my age. I went to some pregnancy groups, some prenatal groups, and the people who ran those groups were all comfortable having me in the group at my age, even though I was 10 years, sometimes 20 years, sometimes 25 years older than the other women in the groups. The women running them didn't sort of pull me aside and say, well, do you need to think about this differently? Or I need to give you different yoga moves in a prenatal yoga class, or I think you need to prepare yourself differently for the birth. I was doing a lot of exercises at home to do with spinning babies because I was really, really interested in that approach of how the baby's positioned inside your body. If you don't know anything about spinning babies, I'll put a link down the bottom. It's really interesting. And as I've talked about in other videos, I've done many, many years of the Feldenkrais method, so I was still doing that every day. It was helping my body feel really good and my posture to be really good, of distributing gravity through my body really easily. So I was actually carrying the weight of the baby quite easily. And so I kept doing that. So when I was in like prenatal yoga class, I was totally fine with all the young women because my body was fairly free. So I just really didn't have any other issues about my age. The only issues I had about my age was the being blocked by all the birth centres, which was devastating, and the awful, awful interaction I had with the conservative mainstream doctor in the big private hospital. And I'm sure I would have had that from other conventional doctors. The only reason I didn't have that with my obstetrician was he's a little bit alternative. He's very open-minded and he's quite unique. So I was very, very lucky. So that's how all the different people in the medical industry treated me as a 48-year-old woman who was pregnant for the first time throughout the course of my pregnancy. Sometimes I was treated like a number, sometimes I was treated like a person. If you're going to get pregnant at an older age, you're probably also going to experience a jumble of that. And I just really invite you to hold your center throughout the whole thing and know that you're having this baby for a reason, you're pregnant right now for a reason. If you're healthy enough to get pregnant, you're healthy enough to give birth. Women have been giving birth for millennia. You can do it too. You'll have the support around you need. You're in charge of choosing your birth team, your doctor, your hospital, your environment. That's up to you. You've got the power to choose that. Choose wisely. Listen to your own gut. Listen to your own higher knowing. Listen to your body. Listen to your heart. Don't be swayed by the opinions of other people. Choose the team that's right for you. If possible, write out a birth plan. Negotiate the parameters for the kind of birth that you want. Get as much wriggle room in that as you can, so that as circumstances unfold, you'll be able to choose what steps to take next during the birth. And just really remember that it's not about your age, it's about your pregnancy. How is your pregnancy going? If your pregnancy is going well, then you're going to have more options. That if your pregnancy is not going well, that's going to place you obviously in more of a high-risk category. And that's much more important than what age you are or your hair color and arbitrary things like that. That's the message of this video. So now that I've been talking about what it was like being pregnant at the age of 48, in my next video I'm going to talk about what it was like being pregnant as a single woman, because that in itself was a huge thing. So when I make that video, I'll put it here, so you should definitely watch that video next. Big love to all you mamas and all you future mamas. We're sending you so much love, so many hugs, and so much baby dust. Bye from me and Baby Star. Bye.